I am.
Got it.
There you go. It's all done. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks for being here. Welcome back to the James Braid Society. As you know, we had a nice face-to-face meeting in January, and now this one's going to be an online one, so it's to answer the prayer for everybody, to give a little bit for everybody. It's nice to see you here. And tonight we've got a really great speaker, a good friend of mine who actually runs the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference, which is a conference that's only been going for a couple of years, but boy, is it picking up pace. Shelley and Brenda, you probably may remember John from Hypno Thoughts. We all met out there. Um, John and I spoke when we was over here. We spoke on the phone, and when I was in Las Vegas, I heard someone call out my name and came running up to me at the bar, and sure enough, it was John. And we chatted the night away and began ever since then. So, but let me tell you a little bit about John if I can. John is a hypnotherapist who's based in County Wexford in Ireland. He's also the creator, as I said, and organizer of the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference. He's a certified trainer in the UK Hypnosis Academy, and he's the event organizer. John specializes in dealing with anxiety related issues, and having been adopted as a child, he has a special interest in adoption and its effects, having lived with that himself. He believes in community, and boy, does he really believe in community, and he's the right person to be doing what he does. He believes in community and the power of hypnosis to create change. Being a therapist can be a lonely place, as he says, and it's not just a platform for the Irish hypnotherapists to meet, but also to learn, engage, and to discuss. So that's why he created the conference in 2023. The idea behind it being to bring the very best speakers to Ireland to share their knowledge and with the Irish community. And it really is a great buzz. So I would say personally, guys, if that's not too far for you to go, or even if you fancy a long trip and a holiday, certainly go there. It's going to be a great conference. I can promise you that. The idea was to bring the speakers together to share that with the community and to create community where therapists can come together to support each other, learn from each other, and expand the field of hypnotherapy in Ireland. That's something I think which is great, because it goes very much in hand with the ethos of the James Braid Society, to make a community for people to learn of each other and support each other. John is successful in Ireland today, and will continue to just expand hypnotherapy throughout the land and to go much further. So watch this space, and remember tonight, because this is only the humble beginnings of where we're going to go for here. John is going to talk to us tonight about the adoption and its effects of the power and hypnosis to heal. John, over to you, my friend.
Thank you. Firstly, welcome and thank you for the invite. Is there anyone here who's adopted? Okay, so there's few people in the room, right? I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start. There we go. You all see that?
Yep, that's fine, John.
Perfect. Just want to make that.
Yeah, you just press the play button. There you go. That's
it. Cool. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go back just for a second, because it's after messing up. So I'm going to leave it as that, if that's all right. It's just technology and me.
That's
so, okay, on the 5th of April, 1994, I stood in a Dublin hospital and I held my newborn son in my arms. In that moment, I realized that I would always want to know where he was and what he was doing, and that he was safe. And I also realized that someone had done that for me 27 years before. I wondered, and it led me on a journey, which I didn't realize I had a void that needed to be filled, but it led me on a journey to find my birth mother. And on that journey, I faced many obstacles, even 28 years later, and I'm still learning much. My name is John Scanlon. I'm a hypnotherapist, the creator of the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference, and I'm adopted. This talk on adoption, its effects, and how hypnotherapy can help to heal, is specifically designed to create awareness, to give an understanding of adoption, how it affects everybody who's involved in the adoption, and how hypnotherapy can help as a solution. It's a personal journey that has led me to this place. Many of the stories that I'll tell will be my own. And so let's begin. The definition of adoption. And if it's all right with everybody, I'm actually just going to get you to close your eyes for a moment, if that's all right. And if any of you have children, or if any of you have nieces or nephews that, you know, are very close, I want you just to imagine something just for a moment. I want you to imagine your newborn babies and you're holding them in your arms. You can just feel the weight of the baby in your arms. You can see the smile on your face as you look down. And then I want you to imagine that you're handing that child over to someone else. And in that moment, you realize you'll never see that child again. And whenever you're ready, just bring your awareness back to the room. That's just a very, adoption is not something that I can demonstrate. And I do love demonstrations, but adoption, the action or fact of taking another legal child and bringing it up as one's own, that's effectively what somebody does. And there are many reasons an adoption is seen as a really good thing, and in general it is. A parent who's unable to care for a child, finding a new home to give that child the best chance. And in most cases, that child grows up happy, healthy, and often unaware of any effects. But I would argue that the effects are always there. They may just be beneath the pressure cooker that never come up. In Ireland, between the years of 1952, when adoption became legal, and 2022, was 48,000 children adopted. An additional 2,000 children were known to have been sent abroad to other homes. And the film Philomena, if anyone's ever seen it, was based on one of those, where a child ended up in America and the struggle for the mother to reconnect with her child. And a further 20,000 children were what the term was boarded out, which means they just didn't go through formal channels. Many of the institutions that ran these homes were Catholic. And the Catholic view was that adoption was a solution when somebody was born out of wedlock. It had guilt, shame, and judgment attached. Over the last few years, we have, as a nation, we've had mother and baby reports, and we've tried to right some of the wrongs. But as we go through this, we'll find that these are primal. These are from the very beginnings. I was born in one of these homes. I spent 6 months and 9 days there, and I was adopted by beautiful, loving parents. There was always something I didn't know. I just didn't know what it was. Like most adopted children, I was told I was special, I was chosen, but for some reason I was different. So what I'm going to try and do tonight is explain why in the best way that I understand it from both my own experience and from the people that I've worked with. Okay, who is affected? There are 4 categories and 3 that I'll primarily deal with. There's the child, there's the birth parent or parents, there's the adoptive parents, and then there's wider families. In relation to the birth parent, a mother carries a child for 9 months, and after 9 months hands that child over to someone else. It's unnatural. It leads to a sense of loss, a sense of guilt. Why can't the mother be the mother to the child? And in many cases, there's not a resolution. The mother needs to grieve, and there is no resolution. The reasons for the adoption are quite important because they may alleviate the circumstances or help to ease the circumstances, or they may not. In the case of my own birth mother, she was, I'm going to say the word, asked in a very strong way by her family not to have me as part of the family. And for her, it led to alcohol, abusive relationships, because she felt that she had never resolved, and she had either let herself down or let me down. I never really understood. And there's also the other side of this, which is there may well also be a birth father. Some may know, some may not. Some may want to keep the child and some may not have a choice. So there are many different factors at play when you're talking about birth parents. The adoptive parents. In many cases, adoptive parents can't have children. There's a sense of excitement, there's a sense of joy, there's a sense of gratitude, there's a sense of fulfillment of the family that takes place once that child arrives into the home. But they're also parents, and like any parent, there is the normal anxiety, and something that's really key, because I've come across cases where when it happens, it's fantastic, and when it doesn't, it leads to, and there's one particular case where two brothers were adopted, and the eldest child, the mother bonded completely. The second child, she didn't. They led to complete different directions for both of them. And she felt guilty, and it really did affect her mental health. So the adoptive parents play a big role because they take over the role of parents, and an adopted child just lives in the house as a child, just like anyone else does. And let's talk about the child. There are general stages of emotional development in children, and I'm going to deal with these because it'll give a context to the next part of it. In infancy, 0 to 2, babies learn to trust their caregivers to form attachments. They start to express emotions such as joy, sadness, anger through crying, smiling, and other nonverbal communications. In early childhood, children start to develop a more complex understanding of their emotions. They learn to label them, they learn to express them verbally. They start to understand and show empathy towards others. And from the ages of 6 to 12, the child becomes self-aware. It's where also hypnotherapists would say our conscious minds are formed, better able to understand and regulate their emotions, and they start to develop a sense of morality, right and wrong, learn to handle conflict with their peers. And then there's the adolescent stage, marked by a struggle for autonomy and the formation of a personal identity. Teenagers may experience intense emotions, mood swings, and many may develop complex social relationships. There is also now a lot of research that is beginning to indicate that the pregnancy period affects the baby's development and temperament. And that's actually really key to this. So what are the core issues that adopted children face? The first one is loss. They're given up by their parents, by their birth parents. The child is taken into a new family. There's still a sense of loss because they've spent 9 months learning, getting familiar with scent, smells, and the bonding period doesn't really take place. It's different for an adopted child. There's a sense of rejection because in order to be adopted, the child had to be rejected. There's a sense of guilt or shame because often children take the blame upon themselves when they see something wrong. We've known this in cases of separation or whatever. Children are reassured it's not their fault, etc. In the case of adoption, it may be below conscious awareness, but it is there. There's a sense of grief because the child has lost their parents. There's no acceptance of that. There's a sense of identity, self-esteem issues that arise. That's a really interesting one because that stays with you. And I'm going to give a little personal account of something that happened to me personally only about 2 years ago. As part of renewing my driving license, I had to get a public services card. As getting a public services card, I had to bring my birth cert with me. I didn't have it. They have it on the system. It's all good. I went in and they couldn't find my birth cert anywhere. So I was told to apply online. So I did. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from the births, deaths, and marriages to tell me they can't find my birth cert, that I actually legally don't exist as it stands right now. Now, I was 56 years of age, or 55 years of age, when I got that call. It does shake you. So that sense of identity, of having two different names, of being born to two different families, affects children in different ways. Intimacy. Because a child is adopted, there's deep-rooted feelings of rejection, guilt, or shame, and not wanting to be hurt again. And there's many cases and evidence of people just, rather than getting hurt, they'll get out first. They're afraid to be intimate. And the last one is control, because they had no say in being given up for adoption. They had no say in who their family was going to be. They were taken from one family and given to another. They had no control. In essence, I'll put that down as 4 words. I'm not enough. And that's a feeling that adopted children will often feel. That I am not enough. And the thing about adoption is that it's from the earliest stages. So children will live their lives and all the normal experiences that other people will have, but it's built on different foundations. It's built on foundations of loss, of rejection, of guilt, of shame, of grief, and in all the ways that affects people. So, what are the common effects of adoption? Often there's a self-destruct button. That's an I'm not good enough feeling. That's a I don't want to get hurt feeling. People pleasing, because we want the attention. Substance abuse. The Archives of General Psychiatry report adoptees are 50%, 55% more likely to be addicted to substances more than those who are not adopted. There's higher risk of mental health disorders. There's identity issues. There's anger. There can be a drive to prove that you're not good enough, or that you are good enough, sorry, to overcome that feeling of not being good enough. And that's a positive. There's also the lack of health information. And today we're becoming better at that in terms of, for those who want it, I'm not one, but for those who want it. But what I want to do actually is I want to go back, and I want to go back to the developmental stages. Because when you're a teenager, and we can deal with these in each of their stages, but when you're a teenager, it's marked by that struggle for autonomy, for the formation of personal identity. Teenagers, as everyone has been a teenager, so everyone's experienced intense emotions. And often that's when the search for adopted parents first comes to mind. And I know it did for me, came to mind. It didn't last very long, but it was more anger at a family. And it was almost like I was lashing out. But it's not just unique to me. It happens in many, many, many cases. Because the anger that people feel as a teenager is exacerbated by the rejection, by the grief, by the not being able to, by the lack of control. There are many different factors at play. In the ages of 6 to 12, when somebody develops critical thinking and critical awareness, that sense of being told you were chosen, you were special, it begins to be questioned logically, critically. And that has been building all the way up, because in that 0 to 2 time frame, when babies learn to trust their caregivers, to form attachments, they've already lost control. They've already been taken away from the scent and the smell and the DNA that they've been familiar with. The other part of it is that when somebody is pregnant and they're happy to have that baby, then they're proud, like I did with my first child and all my children, actually. I spoke to them in their mother's womb. That 5th of April, 1994, when my son lay in that bed and I went over and I spoke to him, he immediately turned his head. Did he recognize my voice? I don't know. I'd like to think so. We can't prove any of that, but there's an emotional bond that's formed and it's taken away in the case of adoption. A mother who's giving the child up for adoption tends to not be, the child doesn't receive as much attention. Often it's hidden, try to hide it. In this country, mothers were sent away to Dublin, to various other parts, but away from their town so that people didn't know. And that has the effect on both the mother and on the child. So when we talk about the effects of adoption, these are from the earliest possible stages. And that feeling of I'm not enough leads people to follow causes. And these don't apply to everybody, but they do apply in a higher percentage of the cases than anywhere else. The part of how hypnotherapy can help, there are 3 factors to consider here. Early childhood, if unaddressed, sets the direction for life. It may not be the best example, but if we go to the circus and we see an elephant chained to a pole, they've been done so from the moment of, arriving, where the chain is strong enough that they can't pull it. We know that as an adult, they could literally just barely lift their leg and that pole would come up, but they have a belief that even if a tent is on fire, which has happened, that elephant won't move. As adopted children, we hold certain beliefs that limit us as adults, that we're not good enough, that we're not lovable enough, etc. But any event is neutral. It's the meaning that we give it that makes it significant. And in that becomes the possibility for change. I am a huge fan of the logical levels model, and attempting to change a behavior or belief that is contrary to who the client believes they are will require a change of identity. That's I am statements. So this is, and I presume everybody's familiar with this, but the environment creates our behaviors create our capabilities, which create our beliefs and values, which create our identity. So if we try and change a behavior, but at a core identity level, we believe different to that behavior, then change is going to be really hard to make. So and because these are at the very early stages, what I would almost call the primal stages, and that term is used in some of the research, because adoption is often called the primal wound. I've seen it referred to as the primal wound. That change needs to take place at an identity level. So how does hypnotherapy help to heal? Well, there are 8 billion people on the planet, and each and every one of us are unique. I don't believe that one technique solves everything. Everybody's different. Everybody has a pathway to allow healing to take place. The meaning, though, that we give a lot of what was said is not logical. Because, and what I mean by that is, we were told we were special. We were told we were chosen, and each of that is true. And most adopted children were given away for a reason, that the parent was unable to care for that child. So adoption has its good sides. And it does mean that we were chosen and special. And logically, that should make sense. But the wounds are emotional. They're not logical. And as hypnotherapists, what we're looking to do is reframe the meaning. We can't change the past, but what we can change is the meaning that we give it. And the question is, how do we do that? As hypnotherapists, we're looking to address cause and to heal the effects. As I work with it, it's self-love, inner child work. It's allowing acceptance, understanding, and grief. I use tools such as anger release forgiveness, which would allow people to express their emotions, to release those trapped emotions that they're storing. And any methods that support self-love and self-esteem will add huge value. It may take many sessions, it may well be mixed in with a whole lot of other issues. In my case, I lost my father at 15, my mother at 17, and my grandmother who lived with us at 21. There was a lot of rejection coming down my path. And self-love was a very difficult path for me to take. Through hypnotherapy, I have allowed that has happened, and that is there. And I'll go through some of the techniques that I've used in a moment. There's a few things that I would just like to go back over, though. That sense of the issues that children face, the core issues that were identified. Let me just go back to that slide. There we go. And I'll keep going back to this because these are the core issues that people face, that adopted people face. So when we go to look to change, we have to address each and every one of these issues as they apply to that adopted person. That sense of being rejected plays out in many different ways. It plays out in that whole mastery and control issue and not being intimate with people, not allowing people to get too close. So how do you reframe something like rejection? Guilt and shame and loss and grief we're probably more familiar with. But reframing rejection is a more difficult task. And I'm reminded of a story. Sheila Granger, who's a hypnotherapist who you all probably know, she is also adopted and her half-brother is adopted. And she was telling me a story recently of how her brother, who had been adopted, got a letter from his birth mother and reconnected with the birth mother and spent a couple of years. And then out of the blue, all of a sudden, in his 40s, he got another letter to say she could never speak to him again. That's that sense of rejection coming back over and over again. And that was that same sense of identity that I was experiencing when I was told legally I didn't exist. I now actually have 2 birth certs. They're both here. And the funny thing is that I had always known I had 2 birth certs. And I actually had found my birth cert. It was nothing new to me. But being told at 55 or 54 years of age that you don't legally exist after paying taxes for 35 years is a bit of a, no matter who you are, that's going to shake you. So the question really is, how is it that hypnotherapy can then allow that healing to take place? So for me, it's working on the concept of self-love, acceptance, understanding, addressing grief. And for things like rejection, it's methods that I would use like anger release, forgiveness tools, and anything that supports self-love and self-esteem. I have a few favorite techniques that I love to use. But what I will stress is that there is no script for this because the client is the script. Each child is different. Each person is different based on their own experiences. When the adoption and the effects of the adoption at that deep level set the child in a direction, but there was other things that happened on top of that direction. Just like me, I lost my father at 15. I lost my mother at 17. I lost my grandmother at 21. All of that was compounded on top of the existing scenarios, and I was never allowed to grieve. In the Ireland of that time, in the 1980s, I wasn't allowed to grieve as a teenager, and I definitely was not allowed to grieve as a child for the mother that I didn't have. So, how to heal? Healing relationships and forgiveness, especially of self. And there's a technique that I love to use for that, which I learned here called anger release forgiveness. And the last part of that is healing and forgiving the self for anything that we deemed as a child to have taken on that it must have been our fault. Logically, that doesn't make any sense. But a child doesn't have a logical brain. So therefore, it's emotional and it's different. Emotional pain techniques like emotional detox and the arrow in particular will be very effective in things like this. Acceptance techniques, techniques that allow people to accept their circumstances, to accept that it was reframed in a certain way, reframed in a way that says it was a positive experience. Self-love and safety techniques, allowing someone to ensure that they know they feel safe. And there's a David Snyder technique that I absolutely love on self-love. And I can guide people through that in a bit. But there's the other side to this. And again, I'll reference both Sheila Granger and myself, because that feeling of not being good enough can be channeled in a different way. It's channeled into a drive to prove that we're good enough. And if you talk to Sheila, she will tell you that she uses that drive to succeed. And for me, I've also done that. That feeling of not being good enough has led me to work with disadvantage to try and heal the emotional pains that others have been feeling, to build communities, and also to form a community here in Ireland through the hypnotherapy conference that can actually help to heal an expanded community. And I've often used that drive of, I am good enough to make that happen. It's been the push that has driven me forward over and over again. Because ultimately, the objective for someone like me is to find the balance between taking that drive, but knowing that I am good enough anyway. And it's finding that balance. Hypnotherapy for me has been the tool that has allowed me to find that balance, has been allowed the tool to allow me to free myself from a lot of the emotional pain. A lot of the clients that I deal with, because we're working with the primal and we're going back to the very, very beginning, once we can heal the emotional pain from the beginning, a lot of the other parts start to heal themselves. So when we're working with adopted people, and we may not always be aware that someone's adopted, it's not something that's a normal tick box on a form, but it's an important piece of information to know, because it sets a direction for life, and it sets the direction that if you want to change someone's identity, someone's belief about themselves, to stop a behavior, whether it's anger, whether it's addiction, then changing at the core level and understanding that the direction set as a child changes everything. And if we can change that, then the rest falls into place. Because ultimately the feeling that any adopted person is looking for is, I am enough. Now, has anyone got any questions?
I've just posted in the chat, John, if anyone's got any questions here. If you want to, I'm thinking, if you want to stop screen sharing, John, we can see everyone's faces.
Yeah.
And if anyone's got any questions, just please raise your hand and I'll invite you to unmute. If not, I'm wondering, would everyone like a quick comfort break to recharge the glass, etc., for maybe 5 or 7 minutes? Would you like that? Yeah? Okay. All right. Any questions before we do that? Any questions? No? All right. So if you all take a look at your watches, whichever time zone you're in, we're going to take 7 minutes, give you a chance to nip to the bathroom, recharge your glass, and we'll be back in 7 minutes. Okay. But before we go, can we give a big hand so far for John? Well done. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you back in 7 minutes. Bye for now.
Yeah.